Welcome to the Relative Clauses 1 video from chapter 28 of the second Ecce Romani book, and this video is going to cover the Building the Meaning and Forms sections on page 4 in chapter 28. So what's a relative clause? Well, it is a descriptive clause that modifies a noun, and it's important to know that that clause is a subordinate clause as opposed to a main clause, which we'll see in a minute. So again, relative clause is a descriptive subordinate clause that modifies a noun. Here's a sentence from chapter 1 of Ecce Romani. Cornelia est puella Romana quae in Italia habitat, which you'll remember we translated as Cornelia is a Roman girl who lives in Italy. We can break this sentence down into actually two clauses, a main clause and a subordinate clause, which is going to be a relative clause. Here's our main clause. Cornelia is a Roman girl. Cornelia est puella Romana. Our subordinate clause, quae in Italia habitat, is actually going to be a relative clause, because that relative clause, quae in Italia habitat, further describes the noun-adjective pair puella Romana. Cornelia is a Roman girl who lives in Italy. Who lives in Italy? The Roman girl. So relative clauses, quae in Italia habitat, are introduced by what we call relative pronouns. And relative pronouns relate or connect the subordinate statement to a noun or phrase in the main clause. And that noun or phrase in the main clause is called the antecedent, because it literally sits cadent before, ante, the relative clause. So in our example, puella Romana, we would say, is the antecedent of the relative clause, quae in Italia habitat. Now when it comes to relative pronouns, let's take a look at some more examples to figure out exactly what those are. So here's an English sentence. I know a man who eats 4 meals a day. If we follow what we just did and break this down into main clause and relative clause, we get the following. Our main clause is I know a man who eats 4 meals a day. That's going to be a relative clause describing man. So man here would be the antecedent of that relative clause, who eats 4 meals a day. How about another one? Marcus, who is 6 feet tall, does not play basketball. We can break that down into 2 parts. Marcus does not play basketball. Who is 6 feet tall? Putting it all together, Marcus, antecedent, who is 6 feet tall, relative clause, does not play basketball. So here we see where a relative clause can come in the middle of the main clause. The women, 3 of whom are married, went to Italy. Doing the same thing, we get the women went to Italy as our main thought, our main clause, and our subordinate relative clause, 3 of whom are married, further describes women. So in this sentence, women would be the antecedent. Let's look at another one. The man whom I saw was stealing a bicycle. Take a look at this for a few seconds and see if you can figure out what is the relative clause in this sentence. Got it? Let's see what we got. There's our main clause. The man was stealing a bicycle. So that leaves us whom I saw as the relative clause. Man being the antecedent of that relative clause. So if we look at all of those again, I know a man who eats 4 meals a day. Marcus, who is 6 feet tall, does not play basketball. The women, 3 of whom are married, went to Italy. The man whom I saw was stealing a bicycle. Cornelia est puella Romana quae in Italia habitat. In all 5 of those sentences, we have the relative clauses in red. We have the antecedents of those relative clauses underlined. So I want you to take a look at the relative clauses and figure out what do all of them have in common. What word or variation on a word do all of them have in common? As you're looking at that, hopefully this is what you're seeing. Who, of whom, and the Latin word quae. Basically the word who. Simply put, the word who is the relative pronoun. And again, we said earlier that relative pronouns relate or connect the subordinate statement to a noun or phrase in the main clause, which is called the antecedent. So the relative pronoun who, or in Latin quae, relates those relative clauses to the antecedent. And having that, now we have the main parts that we need to understand relative clauses. When it comes to Latin, we can decline the relative pronoun. And here is the declension of the relative pronoun in masculine, feminine, neuter, singular and plural, and all 5 cases, nominative through ablative. It sounds like this, going from the top left across. Qui, quae, quod, cuius, 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 cui, 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 quem, quam, quod, quo, qua, quo, qui, 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 quorum, 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 quibus, 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 quos, quas, qui, quibus, quibus, quibus. I'd encourage you to practice pronouncing that out loud on your own time. It looks like a lot, but actually it's not. If we take a look at this a little closer, we can see a couple things. First off, if you look in the neuter, remember that anything that's neuter, the nominative and accusative are the same in the singular, and they're the same in the plural. So that's why we have lines drawn between quad and quad, qui and qui. So that helps us remember this. If you look in the masculine accusative singular, em is in red. Remember, accusative singular almost always ends in m, and e is masculine, whereas in the feminine, there's our ending in m, but there's an a in front of it. A is a feminine vowel, so that should be no surprise there. Next, ablative singular, those final vowels are again in red, and there should be no surprise that a final ablative singular vowel in masculine and neuter is o, and for the feminine it's a. All we're doing is putting qu in front of each of those forms. The plural, we have much of the same. Masculine nominative plural ending for an us, a, or tu, one, two adjective is the letter I. That gives us qui. For feminine, it's ae. That gives us qui. The genitives, our endings for tu, one, two adjective endings are orum, arum, orum. And we have that here just with a qu in front of it. The dative plural is a little different. We might expect is, is, but instead we have ibus, ibus, ibus from the third declension adjectives. Accusative plural goes back to tu, one, two adjectives, os and as with the qu in front of it. And then the ablative plural is going to be the same as the dative plural, so that gives us ibus, quibus, quibus, quibus. So really when you look at this chart, which you should memorize by the way, you want to get started on that, there's not a whole lot here that we don't already know. Really it's only the nominative, genitive, and dative singular that are different. Qui, qui, quod, cuius, 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 cui, cui, cui. But even those help us out in memorization because the genitive singular is the same all the way across the chart, and so is the dative singular. So even though this chart looks like a lot, it's not really that bad. You actually know a whole lot of this chart before you've even seen it before. So this is the relative pronoun chart. It's on page 4 in the book. And again, you want to start familiarizing yourself with this, memorizing it, and mastering the chart, because without that, you're going to be having a hard time with relative clauses. So, for some more practice on this, I'd encourage you to try exercise 28B on page 5, and we'll see you next time.